Hi there. I was looking in my library of musical books, and I had actually planned to review this book, Behind the Song, The Stories of 100 Great Pop and Rock Classics. But I found it actually difficult to review a book about music. It's a very subjective thing, and without actually hearing the music, it's difficult to talk about it. The authors have done a good job in discussing it, but without just directly lifting quotes all the time, it's difficult to review it. I'll put a link to it because it's well worth reading. So what I decided to review is this book, Halfway to Paradise, which is Britpop 1955 to 1962 by the prolific Spencer Leigh. And the book has an introduction, excuse me, a foreword by Mike Brocken, who is also on Radio Merseyside, and I think he works for the university. And he's an interesting, always an interesting character to listen to. And what he says is, if one were to accept the conventional wisdom of many popular music writers that nothing of any significance occurred in British pop prior to Love Me Do, expressions have varied from moribund to musical wasteland to Rue Morgue when describing popular music made in the UK, and so on. And he goes on to give the thesis that this is far from the case, and a lot of the music at that time was really, really good. And that's really what this book is about. My quibble with that is that I don't think he was living at that time, and people who were experiencing it, who were young, did hold that opinion, or many of us did. And a lot of the people who formed the major beat groups did it because they wanted to play their own music, and they didn't like the popular music that was around at the time. It was a consequence of how moribund the popular music was. So that's my view, and the book sets out to disprove it, really. So Spencer Leigh, he writes many of his books based on numerous interviews he's conducted with not just pop stars, but people from all types of entertainment. And he selectively quotes very, very well, very, very relevantly to the topic at hand. And this book was the result of many interviews that he collected for a 12-part BBC series on the subject. So he had a wealth of material. And the book is composed of many of those. Unfortunately, the first interview he quotes is Jimmy Savile, the noted, or the most prolific paedophile in British history. So gets off to a rather doubtful start. Obviously the book was written well before Jimmy Savile's crimes were public. He also interviews David Jacobs. Now David Jacobs was a disc jockey in the BBC mould. He quite often wore a suit and tie or an evening suit, even on the radio. So he says, I didn't like the American disc jockeys at all. I found American cars unattractive and never thought of getting one. And American disc jockeys were the same. To me, the most important thing was to present the next record and not myself. We are our own breed. There's no one like Jimmy Savile. Thank God, we might say. Jack Jackson was unique. He was the presenter of an entertainment which included gramophone records and some marvellous snippets from comedy programs. Yeah, Jack Jackson actually did a very, very funny program. So that kind of sets the tone. And another piece early on is he talks about educating Archie. He interviews Max Bygraves, who was on Educating Archie. And for those of you who don't know, Educating Archie was a BBC masterpiece because it was a ventriloquist with his dummy Archie on the radio. So, and it was highly popular. Unfortunately, when it came to television and he transitioned over to television, you could see he was a terrible ventriloquist, and his career kind of took a nosedive after that. But it was quite funny to read about that. He mentions people like Tony Crombie, who had a big band, and they used to cover American hits, and he'd go around the country playing at the ballrooms, and Jess Harris was his bass player. So obviously Jet went on to be the bass player for the Shadows, and his career is a book in itself, which we'll be talking about. Another phase of the book, he talks about the Two Eyes Coffee Bar and Tommy Steele. Now, Tommy Steele was a massive star at the time. He had been in the Merchant Navy, and he'd actually been on the same ship as my father, because when he appeared, my dad recognised him straight away. And his career was phenomenal, and he went into movies and all sorts of things. And later on, you know, he wrote books, and he did the famous sculpture of Eleanor Rigby in Liverpool. An amazing guy. And he started in this coffee bar, the Two Eyes. So there's a lot of that in the book. Then it goes on to section about the TV shows, Drumbeat and Oh Boy. And these were weekly shows that we could see various of the pop acts. They were mainly Brits, although they did have American visitors on. That was really the best the BBC had to offer, and some of it was really good. Oh Boy in particular, Jack Good, who produced that, was very, very on the ball with the music and with directing a TV program and so on. The book's got many funny anecdotes, but going back to what David Jacobs said with his rejection of American stuff, that really wasn't the popular view. Another writer whose book we will be reviewing says exactly the opposite. Growing up, America was so attractive. Their cars, their movies, the weather, and the music, obviously, was so attractive to young people in the UK at the time. And I think that's a more prevalent view. My problem with the pop music of the time was that the record companies and the record producers tended to homogenize the music for some demographic that I don't know even if it existed. And an example was Cliff Richard and the Shadows. As guys, they were heavily into rock and roll. That's what they liked, and they played when they were coming up, and they moved from, or the Shadows moved, or Hank and Bruce anyway, moved from Newcastle down to London. That's what they were playing. They were playing things like Chuck Berry. That's what they liked, just like the Beatles did. However, once they were fed into the record machine, they went from playing Move It, which was arguably the best British rock and roll record ever made, to Bachelor Boy, because of that system that leveled everything out. And the Beatles, one of the major contributions was to break that and to do it their way, you know, by refusing to record How Do You Do It, and insisting on recording their own stuff. That, I mean, that was unheard of, and it paved the way for whatever happened next. But very interesting book. You know, you don't have to think that I'm right and that the thesis is wrong. There was a lot of good music from the time, and looking back now, I do like some of it, but a lot of it, and a lot of the acts were just for another illustration. When I went to see Lonnie Donegan, I was taken to see Lonnie Donegan, and at the Empire. So I thought I'd go along to see Lonnie Donegan play a very long show. But there were all sorts of other acts on. You know, there'd be people with dogs and ventriloquists and jugglers and all sorts of things that we had to watch before you could see the people you'd actually wanted to see. And that's the way entertainment was packaged for us. Okay, so I say Spencer Leigh always delivers the goods, and he's done it with this book.